Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday night. I would say Yom Sheni, but since it's night, it's already Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. And since it's night, it's also not Hanukkah anymore, but I hope you had a beautiful and elevating and inspiring Hanukkah. Who's in the house on a Monday night? Joe in the Inland Empire, Randy in Florida, Yehud in South Carolina, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Bell in Texas, Melissa in Great Neck, Gail in Kansas City, Sharon in New Jersey, Lorraine in Texas, Guy in Ohio. Bill says from the title, I expect tonight's daf to be fascinating. Yes, agreed. First half, somewhat technical like it's been. Second half, going to be some really interesting stuff. Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota, Moishi in Brooklyn. You need to start saying I'm not a rabbi, but I accept donations. Listen, why give rabbis a bad name? Yeah, every synagogue needs donations. Every yeshiva needs donations. Accidental Talmudist needs donations. These are all non-profit organizations. And it's not free to create content, to teach kids, to run a synagogue. It's not free. And I can tell you that I don't like it. I don't like asking for money, but I need to get over that. And I'm sure nobody really likes raising money. However, it is important to realize when we're making the calls and getting the donations, you're giving a person an opportunity to do a major mitzvah, supporting Torah education, major mitzvah, enabling others to learn Torah, major mitzvah, rewards in this world and the next. So yeah, thanks for the reminder. We are in our annual campaign, and you can donate to Accidental Talmudists and help us share more Torah with more people, as I'm going to mention in 1 second, tonight's sponsor. But the link for that is donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Also, Lester in Florida, Ella in Southern California, and Abel in Panama. Welcome, everybody. Over here back, where did I get to? I said Lucy in Minnesota, Sherry in Babylon. Babylon is in Long Island. Jamaica's in Queens. A friend of mine wrote that song. Babylon's in Long Island, right? Okay, welcome. And Randy says, please include Miriam, Bas Hana, and Yaakov Ben Leah. May they have a mishaber, a refuah shlema, a complete healing. We say amen. Tonight's sponsor is Lisa Gilman, who says, beautiful dedication. I pray for the day when, as you say so often, Sal, we hear only good news. Amen. May that be today when we hear only good news, and tomorrow and the next day. Lisa, thank you. Thank you so much for sponsoring tonight's episode of AT Daily and enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And the merit of that, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings in this world and the next. And we say, amen. 12:22. I'm going to pass it over to Nina. Okay. Okay. A couple of reminders. Wednesday is Christmas Eve. We have people who are not Jewish who follow us. I'm one of the people who say, Merry Christmas. May you have a Merry Christmas. But there is a tradition that we don't learn Torah. It's very interesting. Like, why would learning Torah be tied to something having to do with Christmas? Because, tragically, in Europe, especially in Hasidic Northern Europe, or really through much of the world, since there has been a Christmas, sadly, on Christmas, especially Christmas Eve, that's been a time when Jews were in danger. especially in Northern Europe, kind of 1800s. And so there developed a tradition called Nittelnacht, to not learn Torah on Christmas Eve. This is a real thing. We don't learn Torah. We don't learn and teach Torah on Christmas Eve. Not all Jews hold by that, not even all Orthodox Jews, but Hasidic Jews do, and a lot of other people as well. And so we're going to honor that tradition. We're not going to learn together on Wednesday night, right, which is the 24th, but I don't want to miss the day of learning, so we're going to learn that day at noon. That's all. So we're going to have the Friday schedule this Wednesday, and our class will be at noon Pacific on Wednesday in honor of Nittelnacht. Another thing was that we didn't have class yesterday because Nina and I were at a simcha. It was awesome, beautiful. Bar mitzvah boy did great. What I wanted to mention, when we had class Saturday night, Sharon, late-breaking comment, mentioned that, with this discussion of an acute mourner, when is a person an acute mourner, right? And there are certain restrictions that apply to a person when they have lost a very close relative on that day. And Sharon's comment was, this does not square with what my rabbi told me. An acute mourner is somebody, between the death of the person and when they are buried. That's the halacha, absolutely right. But we discussed a bunch of other views that were not quite the same as that. And that is why it's an important phrase. I mentioned it before. It's good for all of us to remember it. We don't paskin halacha from the Gemara. You say that, you sound very yeshivish, right? Very yeshivish. But what does it mean? Paskin, right? A paskin is like a posek, a paskining rabbi. A paskining rabbi, known as a posek, that's a person who issues halachic rulings. Right, a rabbi is an expert in Jewish law, what is permitted, what is not permitted, what is obligated. So when he issues a ruling of halacha, that's called paskining, right? So we don't paskin halacha. Halacha is, right, Jewish law, normative, dispositive Jewish law, the laws we follow in modern times, what we don't eat, where we go, where we don't go, etc. And we don't paskin halacha, modern Jewish law, from the Gemara, because we are running into all these conversations and discussions and disputes, and sometimes even the end of a dispute, the conclusion of a dispute where they say what the law is, contradicts a conclusion of a dispute in the Gemara somewhere else in another tractate, and that's why we have a Shulchan Aruch, right? An actual code of Jewish law where the law ended up. That's what we follow now, right? Halacha now is stated in the Shulchan Aruch. And even the Shulchan Aruch, was set down quite a while ago. There's been commentary, there's been evolution, not so much changes as much as modern situations that didn't exist at the time that the law was codified, or sort of set down, in final measure. We also have people like Rambam, Maimonides, who was quite a bit later, right, than the sages, even of the Gemara. Maimonides was working 1100s, I think 1200s. And, he made the code of Jewish law, the Mishna Torah, organized it so people could follow it. But some things have changed even since then. But on the question of who is an acute mourner, this is where it is now, right? One is an acute mourner by Torah law on the day of his relative's death, and by rabbinic law for the following night. If his relative is not buried for several days, his acute mourning continues by rabbinic law until the burial, and the day of burial does not take hold of its following night, because the day of burial ended up being a later day than the day of death. So that's the law of the acute mourner. Okay, we continue now. Our daf today is page 101. We're right near the top of 101a here in Tractate Zevachim, 29th volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 12, generally talking about the edible portions of sin offerings when the temple was standing in Jerusalem and people brought sin offerings. A portion of that was edible only by priests, but not by all priests. That's what we're talking about here. If a priest was in a state of acute mourning, for example, he's not receiving a share, he's not eating a share, even though he might be fit to eat it that night. And of course, there's nuances to this law. Also, a blemished priest can eat of the sin offering, but a tameh priest, one who is ritually impure, may not. Right. So there's a whole bunch of situations where a priest may not eat of a sin offering, or perhaps he may, but it's not an obvious answer. And these are the general discussions we're having now. So the sages taught in a baraisa on the 8th day of the inauguration of the tabernacle. Very timely. Earlier today, we completed the 8th day of Hanukkah, right? And Hanukkah is an inauguration. It was the re-inauguration of the temple after it had been rendered totally impure by the Greeks in the time of the Hanukkah story. And then they rededicated it with an 8th day dedication ceremony. Here we're talking about the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the original tabernacle which preceded the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. The tabernacle was built according to God's instructions to Moses, with Moses supervising and the craftsman and artisan Bezalel, fashioning all the parts of it. This was the movable tabernacle in the wilderness, and this is where we brought sacrifices during the 40 years in the wilderness and for the first 400 years in the land of Israel before the temple was built by Solomon. Okay, so now we're talking about the original inauguration, the first time they built the temple, they built the tabernacle and inaugurated it, right? So this was a one-time event in history. That's key. So on the 8th day of the inauguration of the tabernacle, on which 2 of Aaron's sons tragically died, Nadav and Avihu, so Moses spoke to Aaron and his sons, right, the surviving sons, using 3 different forms of the word to command, right, the verb command. He said, "For so I am commanded," right, Moses speaking, Tsuveti, in Leviticus 10:13, and as I commanded, Tsiveti, in Leviticus 10:18, and as the Lord has commanded, Tzivah, in Leviticus 10, verse 15. So Moses said to Aaron, "And you shall eat it, for so I am commanded to teach that Aaron and his remaining sons shall partake of the offerings, even in acute mourning." Right? I mean, just think of the highs and lows to Moses' family, even more directly Aaron's family, and the whole Jewish family. We're all a family, right? That here they had, first of all, the highest moment in all of history was when God self appeared at Mount Sinai. Next to that, pretty close, is God commanding, "This is how you shall build the tabernacle so that my Shekhinah, my presence, right, my manifest, visible, experienceable presence, which anyone could see, right? There was this like energy floating over the altar where the sacrifices were being brought, and fire, right, a holy fire, a heavenly fire would take hold of these offerings. There were 10 ever-present miracles at the Mishkan and at Solomon's temple, the first temple. I mean, it was supernatural. It was intense. It was a revealed presence of the Lord that he caused to happen there. And so he settled in. It's like the Lord's presence settled in, what he caused to settle in there when we inaugurated the tabernacle. And it took 8 days. And on the 8th day, sadly, there was a death, right? It started the night before because the days begin the night before. And it was the 2 younger sons. I think it was the older sons? It was 2 of the sons of Aaron. I think it was the younger sons. Of Aaron, who brought strange fire, right? It's described in the Torah. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says that it wasn't like they were hooligans, that they were messing around. It was that they were sort of intoxicated with the presence of God and wanted to come closer, but they overstepped their bounds. they brought some kind of strange fire. We don't know exactly what that means. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe says they died by the divine kiss, right? They came too close to the presence of Hashem, and it's like their souls flew back to the source of souls, right? In other words, to God in heaven. But for the people who were left here, bereft of two of Aaron's four sons, bereft of two of the four priests, right? Aaron is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. His four sons are the priests. And half of them die in that one instant. Terrible, 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 shocking, grievous event. And so Aaron, as we've learned, right, a high priest is not allowed to make himself tameh, even for close relatives, only for a meis mitzvah, an unattended corpse, but not for close relatives. He has to keep doing the work of the Holy Temple because he is consecrated in that role as the high priest. His sons, the surviving siblings of Nadav and Avihu, right, Elazar and Pinchas, Elazar, what was the other one's name? I'll come back to it. It's mentioned here, just not remembering at this moment. But they lost their brothers, right? They lost their brothers. They are acute mourners. Aaron has lost his sons, and his two surviving sons have lost their brothers. And so they are acute mourners. And so right away, that first day, in that early day of God's presence in the tabernacle as it was being inaugurated, they tested this law that we're learning now, right? Does an acute mourner eat of the sin offering? Aaron said, yeah, no, I'm not eating that because I'm an acute mourner. But did he do the right thing? Let's see. So Moses said, you need to eat it. God commanded that the priests eat the edible portions of a sin offering. You need to eat it. Right? Aaron is telling him, we burned it. And Moses said, how could you do that? He's rebuking him. Like, Moses is just so frustrated that so many of the things he has said, the people didn't listen, disobeyed with terrible consequences, right? Because God is in the midst of the camp. So if you don't obey God's law, in the modern world, okay, well, it's a world with free will, and, something's going to happen to you eventually, but not instantly. But there in the wilderness, where God's with them, pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, really God's presence strongly manifest. When people don't listen, there's heavy consequences right away. So Moses, as the leader, his nerves are frayed, and he's really having a tough time. And now his own brother, the high priest, is disobeying one of the rules. And Moses, you can feel and hear his frustration. Like, that's why he says it 3 times. I've been commanded. God commanded. You're commanded. What are you doing? He says to his brother. So the statement, you certainly... For I am commanded to teach that Aaron and his remaining sons shall partake of the offerings, even in the state of acute mourning. And the statement, you should certainly have eaten it, as I commanded, Moses said to them at the time of the incident, when Aaron and his sons burned the sin offering for the new moon, because the inauguration of the tabernacle was on the first day of Nisan, right? 2 weeks later is Passover. So the tabernacle goes up, tradition says, first day of Nisan. So not only do they have inauguration offerings, but they also have the offering of Nisan, the new month, Rosh Chodesh, just like we had Rosh Chodesh over the weekend. And that has its own offerings. Right? So he burned the sin offering for the new month. And Moses said, as the Lord has commanded, to emphasize that it is not on my own initiative, Moses, that I say this, but it is from the word of God. And so he's telling Aaron, you messed up. You were supposed to eat that even in your state of acute mourning over your 2 sons. And the sages raise a contradiction from another baraisa. The sin offering was burned due to the acute mourning of Aaron. In other words, they did the right thing by burning it and not eating it. Of the acute mourning of Aaron and his surviving sons, since they felt that they could not partake of it. Therefore, it is stated in Aaron's explanation in Leviticus 10:19, there have befallen me such things as these. And if I had consumed the sin offering today, would it have been good in the eyes of the Lord? And Aaron was right? He wins this argument. Moses then conceded to Aaron that he was correct in Leviticus 10:20, indicating that it was not permitted for Aaron to partake of the sin offering in his state of acute mourning, having lost his son that day. Shmuel said, so this seems to be like, well, Moses, who was the lawgiver, said you should have eaten it. Then Aaron says, well, the fact that I was an acute mourner means I shouldn't eat it. And then Moses concedes. Well, we're not clear why Moses conceded. Is it that okay, it was just emotionally painful, but he should have done it anyway? And he's saying is hurt? Or are we saying that the law is, no, an acute mourner does not eat the sin offering, even if he's the high priest? So we keep reading. Right, and the sages raise a contradiction from another baraisa. The sin offering, well, I just said it. So Shmuel said, this is not difficult. This first baraisa, according to which Moses commanded Aaron and his sons to consume the sacrificial meat, even while in acute mourning, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And that baraisa, according to which they acted properly by refraining from eating it, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. And this is as it is taught in a baraisa. Aaron and his sons burned the sin offering rather than eat it, due to their acute mourning. Therefore, it is stated as these, right? Should I have eaten it as these things have befallen me? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say the sin offering was burned due to something different. It was burned, but it wasn't burned because he was an acute mourner. It was burned because they were tameh, right? Remember, 2 people died, right there in the tabernacle, in the courtyard of the tabernacle. So there was tumah there. There was corpse tumah that was present. Therefore, if the meat became tameh, or if the priests are tameh, they can't eat it. They're going to have to burn it for a different reason. Not because they're an acute mourner, but because of the ritual impurity connected to those corpses. The sin offering was burned due to tumah. As if you say that it was burned due to the acute mourning of Aaron and his 2 surviving sons, well, then they should have burned all 3 of the sin offerings that were offered that day, not just some of them. Alternatively, if it was burned due to acute mourning, they would have been fit to partake of the sin offerings in the evening, right? There wasn't a rabbinic decree yet saying that acute mourning status extends into the evening. So once the day ended, they could have eaten it that night, and it's still within the deadline of eating the meat of a sin offering. And there would have been no need to burn them. Alternatively, if it was burned due to acute mourning, wasn't Pinchas, the son of Elazar the priest, with them, right? That's the grandson of Aaron. So who died? His uncles. His uncles are not such close relatives that he's in a state of acute mourning. Acute mourning is only for very close relatives. Father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, or spouse. There would not have been any... So Pinchas, who was a priest, right? We know that Pinchas was a priest, don't we? We'll question that. But assuming he was a priest and only the nephew of the ones who died, he could have eaten the meat of the sin offering. So why burn it? And so since they did burn it, it must be that it wasn't because of acute mourning. It must be because the meat or the priests were tameh. Rava said both this baraisa and that baraisa are in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah, who holds that the sin offering was burned due to acute mourning, not tumah. And this is not difficult. Here, the baraisa, according to which Moses commanded that Aaron and his sons partake of the offering even though they were acute mourners, is referring to the offerings of a particular time, right? Even if we say that sin offerings, that as a law, that priests and a high priest cannot consume it because they are acute mourners, okay, that's the law that is going to hold for the, hundreds of years of the tabernacle, hundreds of years of the first temple, hundreds of years of the second temple, when these situations came up many, 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 many times in history. But it's not going to apply to sin offerings that were brought once, right? Once at the inauguration of the tabernacle, or once at the inauguration of the first temple, or once at the inauguration of the second temple. Those are specific moments in history, not regular sin offerings. The offerings of a particular time, i.e. the meal offering, which was unique to the inauguration ceremony. There, the Baraisa, according to which they rightly burned the sin offering due to acute mourning, is referring to the offerings of all future generations, regular sin offerings, which priests do not eat in acute mourning, as opposed to these one-time offerings, which maybe we override that prohibition because it was a one-time thing. Now, that sin offering was brought for the new moon of Nisan, and such an offering would be brought at every new moon from that day onward, and Moses conceded that such offerings should not be consumed by acute mourners. The Gemara asks, how could Rabbi Nehemiah reconcile these apparently contradictory verses about the sin offering, and how would the sages reconcile these verses? So Rabbi Nehemiah would reconcile them like this. When Moses asks, why have you not eaten the sin offering? This is what Moses was saying to Aaron. Perhaps the blood of the sin offering entered the innermost sanctum, thereby disqualifying it, and that's why you didn't eat it? And Aaron said to him, behold, the blood of it was brought unto the sanctuary, was not brought into the sanctuary within. Right? We learned that if you take the blood of an external sin offering into the sanctuary with the intent to sprinkle it there, that would disqualify the offering, and therefore you can't eat that meat. But Aaron was answering him, no, it didn't enter the sanctuary. So then Moses asked, well, perhaps it went outside its partition. In other words, maybe the blood or the meat left the courtyard, which would also disqualify it. And Aaron said to him, no, it was inside the sacred area at all times. Well, Moses then suggested, well, but perhaps you sacrificed it in acute mourning, which is prohibited for ordinary priests, and that disqualified it. And Aaron said to him, Moses, was it they, meaning my sons, who sacrificed the offering? No, I sacrificed the offering. And as a high priest, I may serve even as an acute mourner. And so that's why Moses said to him, well, behold, the blood of it was not brought into the sanctuary within, and it was inside the sacred area at all times. Therefore, you should certainly have consumed it in the sacred area, as I was commanded, and I commanded you in God's name. The priest should consume today's meal offering, even though they're in acute mourning. And that's when Aaron said to him, behold, today have they sacrificed their sin offering and their burnt offerings before the Lord, and there have befallen me such things as these. And if I had consumed the sin offering today, would it have been good in the eyes of the Lord? So perhaps you heard the command to consume the offering only with regard to offerings of a particular time, i.e. the meal offering, which was unique to this inauguration day. As if you claim that it also applies to the offerings of all generations, then one could prove that this is not so via Kal V'chomer inference from Meiser Sheni, second tithe, for which the law is more lenient than for sacrificial meat. And just as with regard to Meiser Sheni, for which the law is more lenient, the Torah stated, when a person brings his Meiser Sheni and eats that produce that's set aside from his tithing for him to go on a festival pilgrimage up to Jerusalem when the temple is standing there and eat that food in Jerusalem, or redeem it for money and then use that money to buy food while he's in Jerusalem on the pilgrimage festival, and he has to say something before he eats it. What does he say? He says, I have not eaten thereof in my mourning, right? As a mourner, meaning an acute mourner. So you don't eat Meiser Sheni when you're an acute mourner. Teaching that an acute mourner is prohibited from partaking of second tithe. All the more so is it not clear that with regard to the offerings, sacrificial meat, right, which is more stringent than second tithe, with regard to these offerings of all generations, not just inaugural offerings, but the regular offerings of the future generations, an acute mourner is prohibited from partaking of them. So Moses immediately conceded to Aaron, as the verse states, and Moses heard, and it was good in his eyes. And Moses was not embarrassed and did not attempt to justify himself by saying that I did not hear this law until now. Rather, he said, I heard it and I forgot it. As the verse indicates by stating, Moses heard. He was reminded. So the Gemara continues, and how would Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who hold that the sin offering was burned not because they were acute mourners, but rather because they were tameh? How would they reconcile those verses? They would reconcile them like this. When Moses said to Aaron and his sons, why have you not eaten the sin offering in the place of the sanctuary? He meant Perhaps its blood entered the innermost sanctum, disqualifying it. And Aaron said to him, behold, the blood of it was not brought into the sanctuary. So then Moses asked, well, perhaps it went outside the partition. And Aaron said to him, no, it was inside the sacred area all the time. Moses then asked, well, perhaps you sacrificed it in acute mourning and you disqualified it, right? Not that you ate it while you're an acute mourner, that you sacrificed it. You presented its blood while you were an acute mourner, which is not permitted. And Aaron said to him, Moses, was it my sons who sacrificed the offering, that their acute mourning would disqualify the offering? I sacrificed it, and a high priest may present the blood on the altar when he's an acute mourner, because that's the role and the exception for a high priest. So then Moses asked, well, perhaps due to your bitterness, your sadness in your mourning for losing your sons, were you neglectful of the offering, and that's how it became impure? And Aaron said to him, Moses, am I in your eyes such a person that I would treat an offering consecrated to heaven with contempt? There have befallen me such things as these, i.e., even if these tragedies and more such as them should befall me, I would not treat an offering consecrated to heaven with contempt. So no, I didn't do anything wrong. And Moses said to him, well, if so, and if, as you say, behold, the blood of it was not brought in the sanctuary, and it was kept in the sacred area at all times, so then you certainly should have eaten it in the sacred area as I commanded, i.e., as I commanded that the priest should consume the meal offering even in acute mourning. And Aaron said to him, well, perhaps you heard the command to consume the offering only with regard to the night following the day of acute mourning. But during the day itself, the prohibition stands. Maybe we could eat it that night, but we can't eat it during the day. As if you claim that it may be consumed during the day itself, I can prove that this is not so via the Kal V'chomer inference from Meiser Sheni. If you can't eat Meiser Sheni when you're an acute mourner, then how could we possibly eat sacrificial meat while we're acute mourners? And just as with regard to Meiser Sheni, for which the law is more lenient, the Torah stated, I have not eaten thereof any while I'm in mourning. All the more so is it not clear that the stringent case of sacrificial meat, an acute mourner is prohibited from partaking of it. And Moses immediately conceded to Aaron, as the verse states, and Moses heard, and it was good in his eyes. Moses was not embarrassed, and he did not attempt to justify himself by saying, I did not hear this law until now. Rather, he said, I heard it and I forgot. Now we're on page 101b. So the Gemara asks, according to this opinion, why was the sin offering burned? They should have delayed its consumption and consumed it that night. If the problem was you can't eat the sacrificial meat during the day while you're an acute mourner, why not wait till that night? Where there was not yet any rabbinic ordinance, they were not acute mourners once the day ends and we go into the night. We're still within the deadline for eating the meat of a sin offering, which you can be eaten during the day and that night that follows it. So why didn't they just wait till the night and eat it then? And the Gemara answers, tumah came upon the sin offering due to circumstances beyond the priest's control, and they were forced to burn it. What was the tumah that came beyond the priest's control? Nadav and Avihu died, right? They died in the holy temple. That's what was beyond their control. And once they died, they caused tumah, either to attach itself to Aaron and the priests who went up and, carried the bodies or stood over the bodies, buried the bodies. I mean, they were involved with, their dead relatives, Aaron's sons and the brothers of the surviving brothers. So the Gemara asks, granted, according to the rabbis, i.e. Rabbi Yehud and Rabbi Shimon, this is as it is written. And if I had consumed the sin offering today, would it have been good in the eyes of the Lord? And the verse indicates that Aaron could have eaten it at night. But according to Rabbi Nehemiah, who holds that Aaron distinguished between the offerings of that particular time and the offerings of the later generations. What did Aaron mean by the word today? And the Gemara answers, he meant, and if I had eaten the sin offering of the new moon, right? Because it's the first day of Nisan, which is today's obligation, not because we're inaugurating the tabernacle, but because it's the first day of Nisan. It's a different obligation. Would it have been good in the eyes of the Lord? Because that is not, it doesn't have a different ruling because it's a one-time offering, like the offerings of the inauguration. The goats of the new moon, that's a forever obligation, right? That as long as there is a temple or a tabernacle, that will be repeated hundreds and hundreds of times. would have been good in the eyes of the Lord. So the Gemara asks, granted, according to Rabbi Nehemiah, this is as it is written, behold, today have they sacrificed their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, i.e. they offered it as the obligation of the day, the Rosh Chodesh, new moon offering. But according to the rabbis, i.e. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, what did Aaron mean by the phrase, behold, hen, today? And the Gemara answers, this is what Aaron is saying. Did they, hen, my sons, right? Behold, and they sound the same, hen. Sacrifice the offering today, which would have been prohibited to them in acute mourning. No, I sacrifice the offering, and as high priest, I may perform the service in acute mourning. The sacrifice is permitted for the high priest, even as an acute mourner, but not eating the meat. The Gemara continues to analyze the Baraisa. The master says, if the sin offering was burned due to acute mourning, then the priest should have burned all three of the sin offerings that were offered that day. And the Gemara asks, what is meant by all three of the sin offerings? And the Gemara responds, as it is taught in Baraisa, the verse states, and Moses diligently inquired for the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it was burned. That's Leviticus 10:16. And when the verse states, the goat, this is referring to the goat of Nachshon, son of Aminadav. Who was Nachshon ben Aminadav? He was the tribal prince of the tribe of Yehuda, Judah. Where have we heard of him before? He was that brave person who led the way, a wonderful example for all of us for all time. When the parting of the sea, some call it the Red Sea, but it's the Reed Sea, the Sea of Reeds, right? With the Pharaoh and the chariots were coming behind. They were being held back by the pillar of fire. The Jews all went into the sea as after the waters parted, crossed on dry land. But when did the waters part? Everyone says, what are you talking about when the waters part? Moses lifted his staff and the water parted. No, it did not. Moses lifted his staff and the water did not part. When did the water part? When the first Jew went in and started walking in with great emunah, right, faith in God and Moses' prophet, and he said, well, God said the water's going to part, so I'm walking in. And when the water was up to his nose, that's when the water parted, right? Sometimes you have to take the initiative as an act of faith, and then, the heavenly assistance will follow. So that's Nachshon ben Aminadav, and he was the prince of the tribe of Judah. Why is he being mentioned here? Because when the Mishkan was inaugurated, and we were just reading about this on the days of Hanukkah, we read the Torah every day, and we were reading about the gifts that were brought by the various tribes, brought by the representative of each tribe, the prince of the tribe, the leader of each tribe. So here we're mentioning the leader of Judah in his role of bringing, right, these gifts as part of the inauguration ceremony. That's why we're talking about him. And one of the things they brought was the animals that would be sacrificed, in addition to the service vessels of silver and gold, etc. So the verse states, and Moses diligently inquired for the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it was burned. And when the verse states the goat, this is referring to the goat of Nachshon ben Aminadav, the prince of Yehuda, the tribe of Judah, who brought the offering on the first day of the tabernacle's inauguration. We see that in Numbers 7:12. So when the verse states the sin offering, this is referring to the sin offering that the people brought on the 8th day of the inauguration. And the term inquired is referring to the goat sacrificed at every new moon. The tabernacle was erected on the new moon of Nisan. These are the 3 goats that were sacrificed that day. Now, one might have thought that all 3 of them were burned. Therefore, the verse states, and Moses diligently inquired for the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it was burned, to teach that one of the offerings was burned, but not all 3 of them were burned. And the verse states, and Moses diligently inquired, darosh, darash, one of those doublings of the verb. It's being translated as diligently inquired. But darosh, darash, this is the same like a drash, right? When we say that somebody's delving into the Torah, right? He is delving, he is inquiring into the Torah. So here that using that verb for Moses saying he inquired, right? And we're translating as diligently, but we're repeating the verb, darosh, darash. Why were there 2 inquiries? Moses said to them, for what reason is this sin offering burned? And secondly, for what reason are those left unburned? If you burned this, why are you leaving those unburned? And the Baraisa comments, still, I do not know which of them was burned. And when it states with regard to the burned goat, and he, meaning God, has given it to you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, you must say, this is the goat of the new moon, the goat that is brought on Rosh Chodesh, which atones for impurity in the temple. In case some tumah got in or somebody didn't know they were tameh, the monthly goats that were offered on Rosh Chodesh were understood to atone for that kind of tumah coming into the temple. The Gemara comments, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say well to Rabbi Nehemiah, if the sin offering was burned due to acute mourning, then all 3 goats should have been burned. If the problem was acute mourning, well, then how could any of them not be burned, right? They all need to be burned. Because who's going to eat them? That meat is not edible by priests who are tameh. Who are in acute mourning. Not tameh. So the Gemara explains, Rabbi Nehemiah conforms to his line of reasoning as he says, acute mourning does not disqualify offerings of a particular time, right? One time only offerings. Therefore, they burned only the new moon sin offering, which would apply for later generations, but not the offerings of the inauguration, which apply only one time and therefore were more stringent about having their requirements met. And so even a priest who's an acute mourner must eat it, according to that view. The master says in the Baraisa, if the sin offering was burned due to acute mourning, why was it burned at all? He should have eaten it in the evening, right? If the reason we're burning it is because he can't eat it while he's an acute mourner, well, why does he just wait till that night? We keep asking this question. And the Gemara comments, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say well to Rabbi Nehemiah posing this difficulty. How would he respond? And the Gemara explains he holds that acute mourning in the evening is not by rabbinic ordinance. It's by Torah law that they're still in a state of acute mourning that night, even if they buried the relative on the same day that he died. Right? That the day of mourning and being an acute mourner on the day your close relative dies takes hold of that following night. Even though on the calendar it's the next day, we extend that period of being an acute mourner into the night, not by rabbinic ordinance according to Rabbi Nehemiah, but by Torah law. That's why it applied even then. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon also stated alternatively, wasn't Pinchas... Yeah. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon also stated, alternatively, wasn't Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the priest with them? He was not an acute mourner, right? If he doesn't eat it, it must be that the reason for not eating was tumah, not being an acute mourner. So the Gemara comments, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say well to Rabbi Nehemiah. How does he answer this? Why didn't Pinchas eat it if the problem was being an acute mourner? As Rabbi Elazar says, that Rabbi Hanina says, Pinchas did not become a priest until he killed Zimri, who had engaged in intercourse with a Midianite woman, as it is written after that incident concerning Pinchas, and it shall be unto him and to his seed after him the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Before that incident, at the time of the inauguration of the tabernacle, the only priests were Aaron and his sons, right? But his son's sons, his grandson Pinchas, was not yet appointed to be a priest. Right, so he couldn't eat it. That was not on the table. Rav Ashi said Pinchas did not become a priest until he made peace among the tribes at the time of the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, when the tribes east of the Jordan River built their own altar and nearly provoked a civil war. Before this, Pinchas was always referred to as Ben Elazar, right? The son of Elazar the priest. But during this incident, he is himself referred to as a priest for the first time, as it is stated in Pinchas the priest, and the princes of the congregation and the heads of the thousands of Israel that were with him heard the words that the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the children of Manasseh spoke, and it pleased them well. That episode is in Joshua chapter 22, verse 30, well past the events of the Torah. The Gemara asks, and for the other sage, Rav Ashi as well, isn't it written, and it shall be unto him and to his seed after him the covenant of an everlasting priesthood? Right? So it seems pretty clear that Pinchas was not a priest at that time. So why would you even ask this question? And the Gemara responds, well, when that verse is written, it is written with regard to the blessing that it is written, that his descendants would always be priests. It did not indicate that Pinchas became a priest immediately. And the Gemara asks, well, and for the other sages as well, who hold that Pinchas became a priest immediately after he killed Zimri. Isn't it written, and Pinchas the priest heard? So apparently he became a priest only after the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, even if he received the blessing at the time of Cosby and Zimri incident. Either way, he wasn't a priest at the time of the inauguration, but okay, we're just arguing on when he became a priest while we're in this digression. And the Gemara answers, that verse serves to entitle his descendants after him, that they would continue as high priests through his merit. That's why that's mentioned later, but he did become a priest according to this view in the episode of Cosby and Zimri. But nevertheless, he still wasn't a priest at the time of the inauguration. So that's why they couldn't rely on Pinchas to eat the sin offerings. He wasn't available to do that. He wasn't a priest yet. Now, the Gemara raised an objection in the Baraisa. Rav says, Moses, our teacher. Now here, very interesting. Now we're getting into this other interesting material that Bill was alluding to in the opening comments. Rav says, Moses, our teacher, was a high priest. What? What do you mean? Moses was a Kohen Gadol? Aaron was the Kohen Gadol. And the sons of Aaron were the Kohanim. Moses was the Navi. He was our teacher. He was the lawgiver. What do you mean he was the high priest? Says Rav, Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu, was a Kohen Gadol. And he would receive a share of the offerings consecrated to heaven, as it is stated. And Moses took the breast and waved it for a wave offering before the Lord. It was Moses's, right? It belonged to Moses, his portion of the ram of inauguration, as the Lord commanded Moses, right? So Moses was acting as a priest. When was Moses acting as the high priest? So that he could inaugurate Aaron. Right? So Aaron could become the high priest. Somebody had to anoint him. That's why Moses was just a very short-term Kohen Gadol. I think it lasted for a week that he was the Kohen Gadol, just the week of the inauguration, so that he could install Aaron and his sons as the high priest and the priests. But for a very short time, Moses was a Kohen Gadol so that he could do that. Now, the Gemara raises an objection. In the Baraisa, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon claim that acute mourning was not the reason the sin offering was burned by asking, wasn't Pinchas with them? And if it is so that Moses was at that moment a high priest, well, then he could have eaten it. Why didn't he eat it? Right? And if it is so that Moses could partake of the sacrificial meat, well, then they should have asked, wasn't Moses our teacher with them? And the Gemara responds, well, perhaps Moses is different, since as a prophet, he was preoccupied with the Shekhinah, with the divine presence of the Lord, and he was not available to eat the meat. He was busy receiving instructions from God. That's why he checks in later and says, did you eat the meat? Right? I mean, why was he asking that if he had been available to eat the meat himself? Then he would have been there at that time. He wasn't. He was busy with God. As the master says, Moses ascended Mount Sinai early in the morning, and he descended early in the morning. Why was he even not available? The Gemara raised an objection to Rav's statement from another Baraisa. The verse states, with regard to a blemished priest, he may eat the bread of his God, both of the most sacred and of the sacred. Leviticus 21:22. If offerings of the most sacred order, which would include sin offerings, are stated that a blemished priest may eat them, then why are offerings of lesser sanctity also stated? It's obvious that if he can eat offerings of the highest sanctity, even though he's blemished, he can eat offerings of lesser sanctity. And if offerings of lesser sanctity are stated, why are offerings of the most sacred order stated? And the Baraisa answers, had offerings of lesser sanctity not been stated, I would have said it is only offerings of the most sacred order that a blemished priest may eat, as they were permitted both to a non-priest and to the priest. But a blemished priest may not eat offerings of lesser sanctity, which were not permitted to non-priests. And had offerings of the most sacred order not been stated, I would have said a blemished priest may eat offerings of lesser sanctity, as they are of lesser sanctity. But he may not eat offerings of the most sacred order, as they are of higher sanctity. Therefore, offerings of the most sacred order are stated, and therefore offerings of lesser sanctity are also stated. We needed all those things to be taught about a blemished priest. Now, why are we talking about a blemished priest? I thought we've been talking about a priest who's an acute mourner and whether he can eat or not. The Gemara explains the objection. In any event, the Baraisa teaches, as they were permitted both to a non-priest and to the priests, what non-priest is permitted to eat offerings of the most sacred order? That's non-priests can't do that, right? The edible portion of sin offerings can only be eaten by priests. How can you say a non-priest could eat of that? Who would that be? Moses. What non-priest is permitted to eat offerings of the most sacred order? Is this not referring to Moses? And this indicates that Moses was not considered a high priest, contrary to Rav's statement. And Rav Sheshes said, no. This is referring to a non-priest sacrificing on a private altar, right, which was allowed during very brief periods in Jewish history. Once the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael, it was permitted for a time, right, a brief time, for them to build private altars on which even non-priests could serve. And although only offerings of lesser sanctity were offered on private altars, not sin offerings, this baraisa is in accordance with the statement of the sage who says, there is a meal offering that may be offered on a private altar, and meal offerings are actually offerings of the most sacred order. Now, the Gemara raised an objection to Rav. When Miriam, who's Miriam? Moses and Aaron's sister, right? There were three siblings, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And she was a prophet also. When Miriam became a metzora, right? Remember, she had tsaras. When did she have tsaras? That skin condition that is a physical expression of a spiritual malady. When she spoke lashon hara about her brother Moses, right? She spoke about him negatively. What did she say? She said, it's not right what's going on with Moses, that because he always has to be ready to receive prophecy from God, he's not being intimate with his wife. That's really not any of Miriam's business, but she was talking about it, and she was struck with tsaras. And then Moses prayed for her, and then she was healed. But she had to spend a week in quarantine before she could come back. Right? That's the incident we're talking about. So when Miriam became a metzora in Numbers 12:10, who diagnosed and quarantined her? If you say that Moses quarantined her, that is difficult, as Moses was not a priest, and only a Kohen can issue the quarantine instruction to a metzora. Now we're at the top of 102a. And a non-priest may not inspect the shades of the marks of tsaras and diagnose them. Only a priest can do that. And if you say that Aaron quarantined her, this also is difficult, as Aaron was a relative of Miriam. And a relative may not inspect the shades of the marks of a metzora. So rather, it was the Holy One, blessed be He, who bestowed a great honor on Miriam at that time and said, this is God speaking now, I myself am a priest, and I will quarantine her for 7 days to see if the shades of tsaras persist, and I will declare her a metzora if she is tameh, impure, and I will exempt her if she is not tameh. In any event, the Midrash teaches Moses was not a priest, and a non-priest may not inspect the shades of the marks of a metzora, which contradicts the statement of Rav that Moses was a priest. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said the laws of the examination of the shades of marks of tsaras are different, because specifically Aaron and his sons, and not Moses, are written in the passage that discusses them. Then he shall be brought unto Aaron the priest, or onto one of his sons, the priest. So Moses was specifically excluded, right? It could only be Aaron and his sons. Therefore, there is no proof from this baraisa that Moses was not a priest. And the Gemara raised an objection to Rav's statement from a baraisa. Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadav. Well, who else was a child of Aminadav? Nachshon, the prince, the leader of Judah. So Elisheva was his sister. Elisheva was the sister of Nachshon ben Aminadav. And who was her husband? Aaron, right? So the sister of the prince of Yehuda was married to the Kohen Gadol, Aaron. And so therefore it was her nephews who died, right? Nachshon, it was her sons who died. She was the wife of Aaron, so she lost two sons in this event, right? Elisheva Bas Aminadav, the daughter of Aminadav, was the wife of Aaron, and she had 5 more reasons for joy than the other daughters of Israel on the day that the tabernacle was dedicated. Her brother-in-law, Moses, was a king. We're referring to Moses as a king here. Her husband, Aaron, was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Her son, Elazar, was the deputy high priest. Her son's son, Pinchas, was the priest anointed for war, who would lead the army out to battle. And her brother, Nachshon, the son of Aminadav, was the prince of the tribe of Judah, who brought his offering on that day as the first of all the princes. But on the same day of joy, she was in mourning for her 2 sons, Nadav and Avihu, who died on that day. Right? Be careful when you're jealous of famous, rich people who seemingly have it all. You don't know what's going on. And people who have it all suffer terrible tragedies just like everybody else. Here she was. She should have, who could be more on top of the world? The wife of the high priest, the sister-in-law of the king, the sister of the prince of Judah, the mother of the deputy high priest, and the priest anointed for war. And on that same day, she lost 2 sons. Terrible, terrible. In any event, that Baraisa teaches that her brother-in-law Moses was a king. From this, one can infer that, yes, he was a king, but he was not a high priest, contrary to Rav's statement. And the Gemara responds, say that the Baraisa means Moses was a king as well, in addition to being that first Kohen Gadol who could, anoint the actual Kohen Gadol, but somebody had to do that anointing, so Moses acted as the temporary high priest. In any event, the Baraisa that he was also the high priest. And the Gemara comments, the question of whether Moses was a high priest is subject to a dispute among the Tanaim. As it is taught in a Baraisa, when Moses was at the burning bush, much earlier, and expressed hesitation to deliver God's message to Pharaoh, the verse states, and the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. And he said, is there not Aaron your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well, and also, behold, he comes forth to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. Right? This was God reassuring Moses when Moses objected, who am I to go speak to Pharaoh? I'm not a public speaker. I stutter. I can't talk. I'm not that guy. You need somebody else. And God, frustrated with Moses, said, fine, we'll bring your brother. He's a good public speaker. He can do the talking when you guys go see Pharaoh. Right? Moses, who's so tongue-tied that he feels he can't do the job of redeeming the Jews from Egypt because he can't do public speaking. What is the book of Deuteronomy? By the end of his life, he gives a month-long sermon. Right? So he grew. He found his power. He really took be fruitful seriously, right? And he rose and stretched himself and became something that he wasn't before in order to fulfill his destiny. That's for another day. But at any rate, at the beginning, he said, I can't speak. And God said, okay, well, your brother Aaron will speak for you. Why are we mentioning this now? Very interesting. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says, for every burning anger that is stated in the Torah, its effect is also stated. God was angry with Moses for Moses' hesitation. And so the Torah records an action of pronouncement as a consequence of that anger. But in this case, no effect of the anger is stated, right? God became angry with Moses. Was he punished? No, right? He wasn't punished. He still became Moses the lawgiver, Moses the prophet. He led the children of Israel out of Egypt. So what was his punishment? Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, even in this case, the anger's effect is stated. As it is stated there, is there not Aaron your brother, the Levite, right? God speaks of Aaron when he's speaking to Moses and calls his brother Aaron the Levite. And God said, I know that he can speak well. But isn't Aaron a priest? Well, he would become a priest. Maybe he was already a priest in the sense of, how priests before the Torah was given were acting as priests. Why is he then referred to as a Levite? This is what God is saying to Moses. I initially said that you would be the priest and your brother would be the Levite. Now, because you angered me, he will be the priest and you will be the Levite. And the rabbis say Moses became a priest for the 7 days of inauguration alone. And after that, his priesthood is expired. And some say the priesthood expired only for the descendants of Moses. But Moses himself remained a priest. His sons would not become priests after him, but he was a priest till the end of his days. As it is stated, but as for Moses, the man of God, his sons are named among the tribe of Levi, not as Kohanim. This verse indicates that it was his sons who were Levites, but he himself remained a priest. And so too the verse states, Moses and Aaron among his priests and Shmuel among them call upon his name, did call, and this is from Psalm 99, and we sing this. It's awesome. We sing it in our show on Friday nights. It's part of Kabbalah Shabbos, right? I will definitely mess it up, but we sing something like Moshe ve'Aaron Bekoi Hana U'Shmuel Koirei Shemoi. Right? So they were among the ones who called out God's name as priests, right? Now Shmuel is as a prophet. Shmuel was not a priest, I don't believe. So what's going on here? And so the verse states, Moses and Aaron among his priests, and Shmuel among them that call upon his name. So prophets called upon his name, but here it includes Moses and Aaron among the priests, right? So that would seem to indicate that Moses was a priest. And the Gemara asks, what is meant by, and so too the verse states, why did the Tana need to cite a second proof? And the Gemara explains, and if you would say that the first verse is written only for future generations to include Moses' descendants in the tribe of Levi, but not to exclude him, then there is a second proof, and so too the verse states, Moses and Aaron among his priests. And the statement of Rav that Moses was a high priest is in accordance with the opinion in this Baraisa. Now the Gemara challenges the statement of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, and is it true that every burning anger that is stated in the Torah, its effect is also stated, right? If God becomes angry with somebody, you find out what is the effect of that. But is it written with regard to Moses, and he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger, not God's anger, but Moses' anger. And Moses did not say anything to Pharaoh. Reish Lakish said, yeah, Moses did do something. What did he do when he was hot with anger at Pharaoh? He slapped Pharaoh, and then he left. That's according to Reish Lakish. It's not written in the Torah, but it sounds like a midrash. The Gemara challenges this, and does Reish Lakish actually say this? But isn't it written, go unto Pharaoh in the morning, lo, he goes out into the water, and you shall stand by the river's brink to meet him. And the rod which was turned to a serpent shall you take in your hand. That's Exodus 7:15. And Reish Lakish says that God meant Pharaoh is a king, and so you should be amiable toward him. And Rabbi Yochanan says God meant Pharaoh is a wicked man, and so you should be insolent toward him. So if, according to Reish Lakish, Moses was commanded to greet Pharaoh with respect, how could he say that Moses slapped Pharaoh? And the Gemara answers, reverse the names of the sages in this dispute. It is Reish Lakish who says that Moses was commanded to be insolent. Now, with regard to the respect accorded to a king, Rabbi Yanai says, fear of the kingship should always be upon you, even when the king does not deserve respect. As it is written that Moses said to Pharaoh, and all these your servants shall come down unto me and bow down unto me, saying, get you out, and all the people that follow you, and after that I will go out. Exodus 11:8. And he mentioned Pharaoh's servants, but he did not say this of Pharaoh himself, even though this was the eventual outcome. Rather, he spoke to Pharaoh with the respect due to a king, even a wicked king. There are, the doctrines of diplomacy where you speak with respect to a king. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rabbi Yochanan says, derive the principle from somewhere else. Here, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran before Ahab, to the entrance of Jezreel. That's 1 Kings 18:46. So Elijah the prophet ran before the evil king Ahab out of respect. And the Gemara continues to discuss the roles of Moses. High priest, king, was he? So about the roles of Moses. Ula says, Moses requested that he be given the kingship. But it was not given to him, as it is written, do not draw hither, Exodus 3:5. And the word hither refers to nothing other than kingship. As it is stated, then David the king went in and sat before the Lord, and he said, who am I, O Lord God, and what is my house that you have brought me hither? 2 Samuel 7:18. Rava raised an objection from the brisa that was cited earlier. Rabbi Yishmael says Elisheva's brother-in-law, Moses, was a king. This teaches that Moses was in fact granted kingship. And Rava said Ula is saying that Moses did not receive kingship for himself and for his descendants, i.e. it was not bequeathed to his sons. Maybe he was treated as a king, he was the absolute leader of the Jewish people, but his sons after him had no particular designation other than being Levites, right? They were not priests, they were not kings, they weren't prophets, they weren't the leader of the people. Moses had that role only for his own lifetime, not for his descendants. And the Gemara counters, and is it so that anywhere that it is written hither, the verse is referring to kingship for future generations as well? But isn't it written about the kingship of Saul? They asked the Lord further, is there yet a man who comes hither? And Saul was indeed a king, but his descendants were not, right? It was taken away from Saul and given to David. And the Gemara responds, well, if you wish, there was Ishbosheth, Saul's son, who was a king, indicating that Saul's kingship did pass to his son. And if you wish, say instead, Saul is different because the kingship did not stand even for himself, and this is why it did not pass to his descendants. And the second response is in accordance with that which Rabbi Lazar says and Rabbi Hanina says, when greatness is apportioned to a person in heaven, it is apportioned to him and to his descendants until the end of all generations. As it is stated, who withdraws not his eyes from the righteous, but with kings upon the throne, he sets them forever, and they are exalted. That's Job 36:7. But if the person then became arrogant, the Holy One, blessed be he, humiliates him, as it is stated in the very next verse, and if they be bound in fetters and be held in cords of affliction, Job 36:8, and this was the case with Saul. He could have had the kingship for his descendants forever, but he became arrogant. He disobeyed the commands of Samuel the prophet, and he lost the kingship. Okay, just a few comments because the hour is late. Lucy, wasn't Pinchas the son of Elazar the priest? So did that not make him a priest when he became an adult automatically? Or was there a special way that men became priests at that time, right? And that's what so you probably asked that a little earlier because they were arguing about it even in the Gemara, right? It's not a clear question. It's a good question. What exactly happened with Pinchas? Wasn't he already a priest, right? As a descendant of Aaron, or maybe he was too young, or maybe they didn't know yet exactly how it would work, right? What happened at the time of the inauguration, okay, so Aaron was made the high priest, and his two surviving sons, they were priests for sure. And it seems like it was a covenant for their children for all time. Pinchas was already alive. So maybe it was only going to be that sons who were born of priests, right? When Pinchas was born, his father wasn't a priest. His father Elazar wasn't a priest. He was appointed priest after Pinchas was born. So maybe Pinchas had to be elevated just like his father and his grandfather before him by God, and that's what God did after the incident of him zealously, right, killing Cosby and Zimri when they were absolutely desecrating the camp of the Jewish people by, a Jew was having sex with a non-Jew who was not only a non-Jew but an idolater who, the whole incident where the Midianite women were seducing Jewish men, not just to have sex with them, but to then bow to the Midianite gods. It's a terrible, terrible thing that caused a great plague among the Jewish people, and Pinchas ended it, right? And so the question was, but there was no trial, and he just executed these people, thinking that it was an emergency. Was it really an emergency? And God stepped in and said, yeah, that was an emergency. I extend my covenant of peace to Pinchas. He did the right thing, and now he's a priest. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation was that he was already a priest. And we learned a third interpretation today, that he was given the blessing that he would become a priest, but he didn't become a priest until later when Joshua took over and led the children of Israel into the Holy Land. So, there's differing views about when Pinchas became a priest. Sharon, since both Aaron and Miriam spoke Lashon Hara, why was only Miriam afflicted? Great question. She spoke it. I think he listened, but that's also a sin. So why was she afflicted? Might have been a practical matter. Maybe the high priest, God was like, okay, he needs to keep serving. I don't want him to be a metzora. That's going to cause other problems. But it's a great question. Good question. And finally, Bill. Oh, that's a fascinating image. God's self, serving as a priest, even in the more limited context of overseeing the tzaras of Miriam. I'm immediately put in mind of God praying that God's mercy is stronger than God's justice. God as a priest praying on our behalf to God's self. Yeah, beautifully put. That's exactly right. We learned that elsewhere, right? I think it was Yochanan the Kohen Gadol, not Rabbi Yochanan, but the Yochanan the Kohen Gadol, who had this vision and had an interaction with God and prayed that God's mercy would overcome God's attribute of justice. Because if we all got what we deserved, we wouldn't do so well, right? We all sin in various ways. We all neglect our duties in so many ways. And so when the nation was being held to a much higher standard, that would not have gone well for us. And so we're always praying that God's mercy will exceed his sense of justice. And God prays for the same thing, right? This idea of God praying, fascinating image. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, see you tomorrow, Tuesday, regular time. And reminder that Wednesday, special time, noon. Because of Nittel Nacht, we'll have the class at noon Pacific on Wednesday. Have a great day.